not only we have to survive, but we have to somehow move with our evolutionary spiritual path as well, which could be very, very difficult. And it is said that in Kali Yuga, in which we are now, it's much more difficult to practice spiritual life, because you can't sit under the tree. You can't just kind of take your time. That there are challenges coming at you from all directions all the time. So the best practice, which is recommended for Kali Yuga, is actually a mantra. Why? Because the most important thing right now is to keep your vibration high.
Welcome back, everybody, to Joshua's Magic, a channel about the intersection of the spiritual and the ordinary or mundane. I'm joined by Julia Yakub today. She's a spiritual seeker who's started on the spiritual path from a very young age and been involved in multiple different sort of disciplines, practices, and spiritual paths, so to speak. But she's mostly a subjective worker, working on the inner spiritual side instead of engaged so much in outer plane activity. But we are going to be having a conversation about the spiritual path and sort of the beginning steps on it. So welcome, Julia. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So the spiritual path, how would we define the spiritual path? And, how is that different or the same from ordinary life? Some people say we're all spiritual, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Often we think that spiritual path is something completely different from our ordinary life. And in our civilization, we are led to believe that this is something external, something optional that not everybody engages in. But as a matter of fact, it is a very important part of evolution, and it ties with the goals of evolution. So even those who seemingly lead material life, they are moving in the same direction. They're still engaged in developing certain qualities and building up vitality, for example, before they can consciously embrace the spiritual path. And that happens when spiritual things become more of a priority over the material life. So this is the only difference between people who do it consciously and people who do it naturally, because it's just a part of our general evolution.
So sort of ordinary life lessons that people learn, that's on the spiritual path, but there's a sort of distinction when you're consciously focused on your development or on heightening your consciousness, serving others, and that sort of thing.
Yes, this first awakening, I think, happens at the time of what is known as the first initiation. I think this is the essence of the first initiation, when a person becomes consciously aware that there is something more than the material life out there. And their instinct reactions changed into more of intuitive reactions after that. But it doesn't mean that a person at this point leaves the material life altogether. He still has a long way to follow and build a lot of qualities. So typically the time between the first and second initiation is quite long, because there is still a lot of karma being created and worked out as well. And a lot of qualities need to be developed. But yes, this is a point when a person begins to be consciously aware of something, that there is something more than what we see and feel with our five senses. And the process becomes a little bit more directed at that point.
And so how does somebody get to the point of the first initiation?
This happens by the guidance of the soul. When the soul has a certain amount of experience in the material world and decides it's time to bring its avatar back, it sends a signal. And then the personality responds to it. When the personality can respond to it, and this connection happens, then the personality awakes, and there is like a certain spark. It could be in relation to the nature. It could be just becoming aware of the other beings, animals even, and people, that you are not the center of the universe, even though we kind of are the center of our universe, but at this point, you become aware of other universes out there. That there are also beings, that they have feelings, that they have thoughts, and you start relating to them not as a means for you to exploit, but as a separate being. So you become aware of another soul, and you develop a sort of like an empathy to that. So there might be different ways how it happens, but I think this is one of the ways how it can happen. It's a birth of empathy and a birth of the idea that there is somebody out there who's just like you. And that sets you on a journey where you start and become aware that you're living in a space where other souls are present, and you start questioning the nature of the soul. So that's what sets you on this path. But then it could be still forgotten, and you continue developing different qualities. But from this point on, you are more engaged in relationships with other beings. And being in a relationship with beings who are present in your life, this is one of the most effective things of evolving, because you're constantly getting feedback. Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah,
The sort of development of relationships being an integral part of the path.
Yes, there are lines of evolution which just based on relationships. They're just developing through love, relationship. There are no wars. This kind of path is attributed to Venus. I don't know if it's really so there, but apparently some cultures, they just evolve through relationships, and they don't go through the mind development as we do here on Earth. But the mind development brings some sort of a strife into the society. And I think the reason for this is because here we are learning how to be a creator. We are not just a part of the universal construct. We are actually in a school, from which when we graduate, we become creators of our own universes. This is a very elevated position once we get to there, but because of this, we have to go through a lot of hurdles, and we have to learn from our mistakes. So from the point when you awaken and you go through the first initiation, you create even before that, but after this, you start doing it a little bit more consciously, and you start experiencing the results of your creation. We often think that mistakes are bad, but actually mistakes are very much of a part of human nature, how we learn. They're not bad. They're unpleasant, because when we miscreate, we have to live with the results of our miscreation. And then when we do it collectively, it starts building up. And this is how we're going through the Yugas, and how we arrive to the Kali Yuga, which is a time when we face all our miscreations for all this time.
And the Yugas, for people that don't know, are these large cycles?
Yeah, they're large cycles. They start from the times when everybody is nearly perfect, when we just exit the divine realm, and we come and we start playing on the world scene. But as we play on the world scene and create our reality, we make mistakes. And that's why Yugas get progressively worse. So when we get to the Kali Yuga, we made so many miscreations that we are faced with a situation which is quite unmanageable at the end. Then another divine avatar comes, wipes everything out, saves what's good, and then a new cycle begins.
Sort of like is talked about in the Bible with Noah and the flood.
Yes, yes. Well, there are cycles within cycles. So there are changes within civilizations. They happen much sooner as well. There are bigger cycles with bigger floods, and there are smaller cycles with smaller disasters as well. So that's why civilization is being wiped out periodically. not necessarily only at the end of Kali Yuga.
Can you talk more about how you were talking on the theme of relationships and having harmonious, loving relationships with other beings, whether they be other people or animals or what have you. But you're also talking about the aspect of the mind and needing to develop that. So how does the mind come into that, the conscious spiritual path?
Mind is needed for creation, yeah, because when we manifest something, we use the power of the mind and the power of emotion joined together. So if you're learning to be a creator, you have to exercise your mind and you have to refine it and develop to the point when it becomes an instrument for your creations. So that's why we have this interjection in our civilization, this stage when the mind development becomes very, very important. And the mind is a very volatile thing. It's a very powerful thing. And we need to learn how to use this instrument in our life, in our, the main thing about it is, I think, is cause and effect connection. We have to learn the connection between cause and effect. What we did, what we get, this kind of thing. So, and then when all the people, do it, our creations, they kind of collide. For example, if I want to create something and you want to create something else in the same space, we're going to have to do some kind of negotiation. We have to harmonize our efforts. And sometimes we find it challenging. So that's why there is so much argument and disagreement and strife. And it happens on a personal level and on a societal level and between the countries. And then we have wars. This is all the activities of the mind, because somebody thinks that it should be this way and somebody thinks it should be that way. But this is like, these are the conditions we are coming in. And the spiritual path in these conditions is about finding harmony in this conflict that we are having, because in the final end, we are all part of the one whole. We are part of the one entity. And the relationships they allow us to find points of harmony between different members, and then we are supposed to move into the future together.
Well, let me ask you, since we're talking in sort of broad terms about society to some degree, there's a lot of disharmony today. One of the major things is the division between right and left and different sort of political ideologies and factions. What are some steps that you think would be helpful in people being able to bridge those divides?
Well, that happens naturally when we become more consciously aware, when we expand our consciousness, and when we can see what other people do from different point of view. Because usually our view of things is quite linear. We come from our perspective and we're moving along the line. But other people, they're coming from a different perspective, and they think they're right too. Everybody thinks they're right because they choose the best option from what's available to them. So unless you see the things from their point of view, whether you disagree or not, you are going to be in conflict with that position because it's not your position. It differs from yours. Yeah, it's and also you're gonna feel threatened because you think it's either them or you. We have this idea in a society that in order for somebody to succeed, somebody else has to fail. And this is a very materialistic perspective. In spiritual perspective, you cannot succeed if somebody else fails. You have to succeed together. So this idea happens when you expand your consciousness so much that you can accommodate all the other points of view. The reason we don't do it usually is because we are at a certain point of development on our own path. Let's say spiritual path, which is also includes, material elements in it at these different stages. And as we are working on some idea or quality, we focused on this. Everything else which comes from outside could be seen as a distraction, could challenge actually our success to reach a certain goal, short-term goal. That's why we're going to fight fiercely against it to keep this influence out. The difficulty of our time now, that because the whole Earth is supposed to come on a different level, we are sort of passing through the needle's eye right now. And all these ideas and types of constructs, in a society which should be existing in different times, they all collide and they all exist simultaneously because everybody has to pass through the eye of the needle at the same time. So that's a very challenging time. We don't have any rules, what is good, what is bad, what is right, wrong in a society now. Everything is possible. And everybody can choose from multitude of different ideas.
Yeah. Well, certainly in the West, maybe not everywhere, but a lot of that in the West for sure.
Yeah. That's of course is sort of detrimental for the fabric of society, and it breaks the rules. For example, when we were children, there was one set of rules. Now there is completely different set of rules or no rules. We don't live the whole life without change like previous generations did. Some of them. No, I mean, there were times when things were as turbulent, but then there were more peaceful times, more solidifying influences. And now everything is in chaos. Everything is up in the air. And in this situation, not only we have to survive, but we have to somehow move with our evolutionary spiritual path as well, which could be very, very difficult. And it is said that in Kali Yuga, in which we are now, it's much more difficult to practice spiritual life because you can't sit under the tree. You can't just kind of take your time. That there are challenges coming at you from all directions all the time. So the best practice, which is recommended for Kali Yuga, is actually a mantra. Why? Because the most important thing right now is to keep your vibration high. And this is very, very difficult. Even though it was natural in the previous yugas, this time it's not like this because of all these constant disruptions. So mantra is the easiest way to raise you to correct with vibration making practice spiritual life. And there are different mantras. There are many different ones which are specific to a particular path, your own.
Could you give us some examples? Could you give us some examples?
If you take any authentic spiritual tradition, especially from the East, or even Christian ones, they will have certain chant or prayer that you have to repeat. Not the prayer when you're asking for somebody or you're glorifying the deity, but some phrase. I mean, it could be glorifying phrase, but something you have to repeat on the beads, for example, like in the Rosary in Christianity. Yeah, there are different chants, and in Eastern traditions, like even Om Tat Sat and different other mantras. These are all mantras that raise you to a certain vibration, and if you are on this path, that helps you very much to stay tuned if you are struggling to do it if you're not already established there, it's becomes easier to keep insulated from the world influences as you move forward on a spiritual path and you pass higher initiations. But in the beginning, it could be very difficult. So for a majority of people, having some sort of a sound that helps you to focus on where you need to be on a spiritual path is very, very helpful. If you don't have this, nature sounds can also do the same thing. For example, sound of the waves that puts you in the theta. Bumblebees, not every bee, but specifically bumblebee, has vibration which is very close to Buddhic vibration. That's why in many traditions you'll find it as a symbol, or you find hexagons. For example, Templars, they have bees as a symbol in their practices. I think in Egypt you can find that, and you know, all these images of different insects, they also represent a certain vibration.
So, and I'll talk to you later, but maybe we'll have some links in the description if people want to check out different mantras. But yeah, that's interesting. The mantra or sound being used to stabilize you in the more chaotic period of development in the West, or in the time period in general, the Kali Yuga.
Yeah, this seems to be the easiest and the best way to do it, because the mind is subjected to all kinds of influences from all directions. And even when people disagree, if they can steady their mind and get themselves to the right condition, they could much more easy to, you know, solve their differences.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem with the disagreements. I don't want to get too far into this, but yeah, people just say things without giving too much thought to it. And if people really wanted to have constructive dialogues, it would be good to take a minute and try to tune into the divine, or say a prayer, or maybe even listen to a mantra, or say a mantra or something like that beforehand.
Yes.
So yeah, before you go posting on Facebook, step back for a minute and try to tune in if this is the right vibration or the right message. Yeah,
listen to some chant, or go for a walk in the forest, or watch some insects buzzing around, you know, and calm yourself, because our modern life constantly demands us being in the beta state. Beta is when you're most active, when all your senses are external.
Are you saying beta or theta?
Beta.
Oh, better. Okay.
Beta, yeah.
And beta, B-E-T-A?
B-E-T-A, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's a beta state is when you're working, when you're outside, when you're interacting with people on the street, when you're rushing somewhere, you have to do something, you're going down your to-do list, you know, you're running your errands. This is beta. And I think our society is designed in such a way that you have to be in this state as much as possible. And this is contrary. This actually destroys your spiritual practices completely, because you cannot focus on anything internal in that state. All your senses are out there and get triggered by what you see, what you hear, what kind of comes across you, sensations, smells. It's all kind of, you know, takes you over. When you're in the nature, you are in an alpha state of mind, and this is when the healing begins. You know, that's why being in a forest, on a nature, is so pleasant and calming, because it's an alpha state. The next state would be theta, and when you're in theta, then you can start getting in touch with your subconscious. And this is where you get intuitive insights, revelations, where your knowledge turns into realization. You know, you have to go into theta to process these things. I mean, your subconscious will process it anyway, but in order for you to consciously participate and get immediate results from your spiritual insights, you need to go into theta. Yeah.
What do you think of, because in various spiritual writings, especially the Alice Bailey books, there's this idea of having a dual state of consciousness, that you're aware of the outer world and able to function in it, but you're also at the same time have an awareness of the soul or the spiritual world.
Yes, this also comes as a result of a certain spiritual development and the condition of your energy system. Like some people naturally gravitate to alpha states of brain states, you know, because they feel uncomfortable otherwise. They sort of lose touch with themselves. So in order to have this, I mean, I don't know, but how it comes about, because I've been experiencing since I was a child.
Mm.
I had more problem being in the outer senses than being in the inner senses. And I always felt like I was walking with one leg on one side and one leg on the other side. And I had a big door into the subconscious. Yeah. Uh, I don't think there's something that needs to be cultivated. It just comes naturally when you are on a spiritual path. And I think many experiences now, especially like in Alice
Well, I
Bailey's.
think I'll add some of my experience because I didn't start out like you with having both of those there kind of at the front. Um, and my path went through a spiritual group called Subud. But it wasn't like I started this practice of Aladihan, and there should be an upcoming video about this so you can find out more about Subud. But yeah, I mean, another way you could look at it is meditation, that you're opening that door to the spiritual, but it's not just like going to church on Sunday. You don't just oh, well, I'll meditate over here. I mean, that's how it starts out at first, right? You have your spiritual practice and you sort of set a time to do that. Maybe you meditate once a day, maybe it's just once a week or at the full moons or other things. But you want to bring that consciousness into your daily life. Um, and that's a long process. It's not just going to happen like that. But once you've built enough awareness of the spiritual conscious, being aware of it as you're doing things, when you're talking to somebody, at a certain point, you won't have to like get quiet and tune in. You'll just have a sense that, oh, I'm supposed to say this or this is the way to handle things. But, you have to, for most people anyway, I think, that are more aware of that, as you put it, beta state, you have to develop the consciousness of the other intuitive theta state sort of stuff. And then once you've developed that to a certain degree, starting to integrate it into the ordinary life or have that dual awareness.
Yes, of course, it could be developed, but meditation in the beginning could be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
You sit still, you try not to think anything, and all the thoughts that just keep
Yeah.
coming in. So for those who have this problem, and it's a real problem, you can just do nature walks. You can just go and walk in the forest and clear your head. Go for several hours.
Yeah, I was going to say there are actually a lot of sort of different spiritual paths, and just because, meditation is a pretty wide word, but sometimes it gets thought of very narrowly.
Yeah.
And if that sort of narrow definition doesn't work for you very well, there are other ways, and there's one of them, like you were saying, walking through nature. But yeah, you got to find what's right for you, at least at the point in time that
Yeah,
you're.
meditation shouldn't be a chore. When it becomes a chore, it doesn't work. Because you hate it, it's like with exercising. If you hate exercising, you're not going to get any benefit from this, and you're just not going to do it, basically. So find something, because meditation, if you look at it, it's basically altering your brain frequency. Actually, we live in a world of frequencies. Everything is about frequencies. And in Kali Yuga, again, it's much more difficult to sit still and meditate because you have daily schedules, you have neighbors, you have sounds, you have family members, you have, world out there, and it disturbs you. And sometimes I remember there was a period in my life when I was going through intense purification, when suddenly, like as soon as I would sit to meditate, my neighbors would just have a disaster and they would be knocking on the door and somebody would start drilling something and construction would be going on and the dogs barking and the airplanes flying. So yeah, so we have to deal with all this, and it's an interesting test. But you can start with something very simple, just being alone in the nature, just walking on a seaside, walking in the forest. This is a good meditation because it gets you used to being in this kind of relaxed alpha state. And to this, you can start adding different practices as you go. Another thing, of course, which is recommended, and especially this is for people between first and second initiation.
I don't want to lose that. I think what you said there is very important.
Yeah.
This idea, because it really can be overwhelming, like somebody who's interested in spiritual development, and then they're told it has to be like this and you have to do this. but you really need to find where you're at. And if you're starting out with something very simple like walking through nature, and then like you just said, you add in something, you know, that
Yes.
when there's an opportunity, when there's room, when it fits, when you're able to make it work properly for you, then you can start adding in some other practice to it.
Yes, you don't have to be at war with yourself. Basically, at war with your own subconscious, because you don't know what's in it, and you're gonna lose. You know. What else happens? You see, the interesting thing is like sometimes what gets in our way is things which we haven't cleared, because we carry not only our own past experiences, but all our ancestors and their souls' past experiences through our DNA. And we carry with ourselves a lot of different gunk, especially like I was talking in the beginning, as we get to the age of Kali Yuga, like now, you know, all these miscreations, they all come together and face you. So all this load which we carry can interfere with our spiritual path in so many different ways as a different triggers. For example, you're trying to reach your subconscious. And on your subconscious, you don't know it, but on your subconscious, there is some really painful experience that you didn't process. Your subconscious and your ego, in order to protect you, so you suddenly don't walk into this, you know, it will block your efforts to go into Theta, for example. Because that thing is screaming to come out. And if you go into Theta, you're going to have to face it, but you're not ready to do this. So there is another part of spiritual practices, and it's about inner hygiene, I would say. It's like, it's about...
What was that word? Inner what? Inner what? What
inner
was the
hygiene.
word?
Inner hygiene.
Oh, hygiene, yeah.
It's a magnetic purity. It's like in some, you know, systems, it's called magnetic purity, which people, you know, have to deal with this. So working on your own purification is also very important. And there are different also practices for this, like holotropic breathing, for example. Just one comes to mind. You know, I didn't do that.
What was that?
Holotropic breathing. It's like it's a special
holotropic breathing.
Yeah, breathing exercises that you can do to bring this old traumas to the surface so you can deal with them safely. That has to be done with a practitioner. I wouldn't recommend doing it by yourself, because it could be very difficult on your own energy system. You know, if these things will come up, if you provoke some of it, and it will come out, and you're not ready to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's another good insight, that you have all these kind of things below the surface, and as you walk more consciously on the spiritual path, they're going to come up. And you know, sometimes people think like, I'm a good person, or I'm this way or that way, but they don't realize that what you're saying, that there's these other things that are totally different, and they might not even be from you. Like, you know, they might be from your ancestors, right? Like your grandfather might have been a rapist, or your mother might have been like...
Yes, and you carry that. You carry that experience. Yeah.
And so it's... Yeah, I think it's important that when that's coming up, that you're able to, in a certain way, in a certain measure, embrace that, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you go like, I'm a murderer too now, let me go kill people. But in your consciousness, you're able to accept that that's part of you, if, you know, if it is, right? Like if you have this thing from a past life, or from one of your ancestors, because, you know, whether or not you accept it, it's still there. And if you accept it, then you can transmute it, right? But you have to accept it to some degree first, that this is something I did or my ancestors did, and then it can come to the front, and then you can actually work with it in some ways and transmute it and purify.
Yes, the way purification works is that it has to come up to the surface, and you have to become aware of it. And as you become aware of it, you experience emotions. And sometimes the emotions are very strong and they're very painful. So what you do, you put it right back where you can't see it again, you know? But that means you are not getting rid of it. It means it will come up again at another time, you know? What you have to do when it comes up, you have to process it and release it. Basically, if you feel shame, guilt, anger, all these negative emotions, you have to be able to safely feel it and then let go. Let go of attachment and what your soul wants, like for example, if it's some misdeed in the past, yeah, or yours or your ancestors, the soul wants you to understand what it is, how much pain it causes to you and others, and never do it again. It's like you don't create this situation again.
Yeah.
But sometimes the recognition of this happens is so painful that a person basically blocks it and it
Yeah.
goes back into subconscious and it sits there. But then it prevents you to go higher.
Yeah.
You cannot go higher. In
Yeah,
order to
all
go
that stuff,
high,
it's like if you imagine, God is here and you're here, all that
yeah,
stuff is like it gets in the way, right? And you can
yeah.
have, a connection to God or your soul, but it's not it's not a totally full connection because some of that stuff is still in the way.
Sometimes you can have no connection.
Hmm.
Because there is one peculiar thing which I learned about. It's actually very interesting. When you can't face your negative experience to such degree that you do not come out into the light at all.
Hmm.
Because you're afraid that if you come out in the light and everybody sees it, you'll be punished.
Hmm.
So you engage in sort of pseudo spirituality, or you go very, very slow, but you don't come out into the light. And for soul, it's a big problem because soul needs all the experiences,
Hmm.
good or bad. In order to have good experiences, soul needs also to have bad experiences. So it knows like this is cold, this is hot. You cannot know what's hot if you don't know what's cold, right?
Hmm.
So for the soul, they're all important, but for soul wants you to process that. You have to process that and come out higher because of this.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think one thing I would add is that it's important if you do have some degree of soul contact. Um, that you know what the next thing to work on is because there's all this subconscious stuff and logically you could sort of point it out, right? Like if you're a logical person, like if you're super emotional, it's going to be really hard to tell, but you could see like, oh, this thing triggers me and that doesn't really make sense, or I
Yeah.
feel this way that anytime there's something that's sort of out of the ordinary, um there's something deeper there. Like, I mean, if somebody just starts screaming and cursing at you and you get sad or you get angry, that's sort of normal, right? It's not necessarily an indication that there's all this stuff below it. But if somebody says something really innocuous and you start to get a little angry or irritated, there's something below there. So you can actually, start to dig and sort of uncover that and maybe look at the symbolism there to figure out what's beneath it. But it's important if you've developed some consciousness of the soul that you go in the direction your soul is leading you. Like what's the next thing to dig up? Because this thing might not be the thing you want to dig up right now. It might actually be important to look at this thing first. And the soul can see from a higher perspective what's the best order to deal with it. But if you just go in a kind of like, ooh, I found this, let me dig this up, that doesn't always lead to the best and most harmonious way to move forward with that process.
Yes, the soul will always create conditions for you to learn, to go through this, to release these things in a best possible way. But it could take a long time. It could take lifetimes.
Yeah.
And it was even said, is like Eastern wisdom was said, even if you don't do absolutely anything, nothing, you do nothing on a spiritual path, you will still arrive at your destination, but you'll be at the very, 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 very end of the cycle.
Hmm.
The flow will bring you there.
Hmm.
But if you don't want to suffer additional lifetimes, if you are attracted to pure and cleaner lifestyle, you can help yourself by doing these things consciously. That's why at the first initiation, our consciousness kicks in, so to help us to go a little bit faster, so we could make
In
conscious decisions.
what you said, it reminds me of something. In Subud, the founder, he was sort of referred to as Bapak, which in Indonesian means like Mister or Father, but because he had a really kind of long, complicated name. But he said when doing this practice of the Latihan, it like cleans you out, right? But
Yeah,
he said what he made this analogy like during the week, people like do stuff that make themselves dirty, like smoking a cigar, and you put it in an ashtray, right? And now the ashtray is got cigar ashes. And, you know, in the spiritual practice, it comes in and cleans it out. It's almost like a butler who comes and cleans the ashtray, you know, once a week or something like that. But if you want it to be clean now, you need to stop putting ashes in the ashtray.
Yes, yes. Also, of course, you cannot do, if you use purification so you can sin more and then do more purification, you're not going to progress very fast because it's considered to be an offense.
Mm.
You're focusing on your ego because what you really want to do, you want to repeat the sinful activity. But you don't want to be punished, so you clean it and then you do it again. You clean it, you do it again. We're not talking about this sort of thing, you know. This is not actually a spiritual practice. This is a material practice. We're using spiritual instruments.
Mm.
Yeah. But if you genuinely want to become closer to your soul and go up higher, improve your life, go higher than where you are now, you have to go lower and clean all this gunk, and then you can go higher. You cannot go high if you don't go low. You know, again, you have a spiral here. It's not linear, then you just kind of go like on the steps up, 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 up. No, you have to go down, and when you clean it out certain level, it will allow you to go up automatically.
Like that phrase in the Bible that you have to go beneath all things to go above all things.
Yes, yes. And this is why we come into the material world, because we want to go even higher. We are at the very bottom of the universal construct. We have our 7 levels, but there are 49 altogether, and we are right in the bottom there, you know. So we come down here because the soul actually wants to go higher. It happens like this, and it has to, you know, go down, up, then you go more down, more up, and your realm expands, you know. And then, of course, you don't repeat things which tie you to the undesirable situations.
Yeah. You don't create creating cycles, right?
Yeah.
And if you stop creating the cycle, you stop going down to that level.
Yes, yes. So once you start doing the cleaning, you have to also watch your actions in your life and don't repeat, because, you know, it's a very difficult and unpleasant process to deal with all these past, you know, situations which are negative.
So that sort of brings us back to the consciously handling of things. And I know you had some thoughts on the mystical path and the occult path. Could you tell people about those two paths and where they exist and what differentiates them?
Yes. I want to say a little bit more about what we
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Talking about. Yeah. So this conscious cleansing process, it usually happens after second initiation and close to the third. And it has to be completed between third and the fourth. Also, it's important to know that initiations are basically
it looks like
and they are
so you froze there for a minute.
To our chakra system.
You said so you were saying initiations are a quantum leap for the chakra system?
For our energy system.
Energy system, yeah.
Yeah, and our energy system consists of, you know, with 7 chakras, and our consciousness will be situated at the points close to one of the chakras. So every time when our consciousness, our center of being moves up, that's the initiation. Moves up and doesn't come down again. It changes its position to a higher chakra level. And when we approach fourth initiation, our center of being moves into the third eye, and we become integrated personality. So we're not actually integrated personality before the fourth initiation. We're still going through different motions, and still there is a possibility of being stuck at the lower position, falling. You know, you can still fall at this. So cleansing, lifestyle, And also the amount of vitality is very important. For example, in older society, they would start people on a spiritual path when they were children. Basically, like at the age of 12, they would start teaching children some spiritual truths, engaging them into meditation. Why? Because it was important to build vitality from the earlier age, which is necessary then to go through initiatory processes. They're very energy intensive processes when you leap, you know. And if we spend our young years being misguided and being disrespectful to our own body, to our own energy, basically depleting our vitality, it's becoming much more difficult in the future to engage in proper spiritual practices, even like meditation, I want to speak of yoga, and even like going through initiation, we just simply may not have enough health to do it. This is also a very important point, which is why in the past they would start very early with this. But of course, we're in Kali Yuga, and you know, our environment does everything possible to distract us from our spiritual advancement. And here again, the sound is our savior, the mantras, and even like in medicine, there is a sound treatment. People do like different sounds considered to be healing. We can see them in nature, like a bumblebee sound, like a wave sound, like a cat purring sound. They are beneficial frequencies which help us to build up our vitality. So, you know, it's very important to have some sort of structure around you, which will allow you to keep your health and your vitality if you want to engage in spiritual practices and move forward. Not just learn about spirituality, which is also good, but this is a very long path, and there are a lot of, you know, illusions on that path too. But looking after your inner being in so many different ways can all help for you to pass through these challenging points, which we know as initiations, or even approach them, or even like make any kind of progress. Pure living, high thinking, you know.
I think there might be some parents watching, and what you brought up was interesting about preparing your children at a young age and helping maintain their vitality. Is there anything else you would add to that about what parents could do today?
Well, as a parent, I can say that children at a certain age, they want to be a part of a society. And you cannot insulate them from this. You cannot isolate them from society and keep them locked up and just, you know, raise them on best principles that you think is best, but without interaction with others, because relationships are also important for spiritual advancement. So how do you balance this? The only way you can do is, since they are very young, immerse them in a spiritual atmosphere. Talk to them, be honest. Don't force them to do any practices, you know. They may not be ready. You don't know that soul. They come to you, what's their path and what they need to do. They will decide for themselves later. But if in childhood they are exposed to healthy things, if they have healthy diet, clean water, clean air, and loving atmosphere, plus they see what you do, how you handle your spiritual needs, then later on they will have some example if they want to come back to it. But you know, you cannot isolate them from the society. We don't have a community structure that would allow to raise children differently these days. And even those who try, the communities are so small and so locked up, and the children grow up, they want to experience the bigger world all the same. And they come out without being properly prepared, which is also quite sad and could be quite dangerous.
A lot of things to balance today.
Yeah, so I think important thing here is not to apply any force. Offer, but let them choose. Offer and direct, and always be there to support them. And of course, unconditional love is very important. Not having ambitions for your child or what you didn't become, you want them to be. You know, they have their own life.
Yeah.
You have to love them because they are souls, who came into your care.
It
Sorts of
does.
children, yeah. The main thing is not to force them. Even like I've been living in India in the temples, and when children come in the temple during services, they like to play, color, run around, scream. Of course,
Mm.
the noise has to be controlled, but nobody would ever stop them. They could do whatever they wanted, and that was a philosophy there.
Mm.
Because if you force a child to behave a certain way, he will develop resistance to this, and he will not like it when he grows up.
Yeah, that's important. I've seen that people get alienated to the spiritual stuff because their parents push it, or there's some negative aspect about it or whatever.
Yeah, the best when they're exposed to it, but not forced.
Yeah.
It has to be fun. It has to be pleasant and happy and full of love, of course. Because as a soul, they got attracted to something which offers them love. This is what everybody wants, more or less. And that's why we are going on a spiritual path, because the real love is out there, where the soul is. It comes from the soul. Yeah. So lifestyle does matter. And for people who actually who are like, especially between first and second initiation, it's very helpful if they have some kind of example, and they have a guru or a guide or a leader who can teach them on a certain path. They're considered to be always very helpful if a person like this is available to guide you and to teach you how to meditate. It's much better than to try to do it yourself from just by reading different books. Because there has to be a system.
So are you ready to talk about the mystical and occult path and the distinction there?
Yeah. What I was always very interested in the question: how does mystical path change into the occult path? What happens there? Like, how do you, from mystic, you become an occultist all of a sudden?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
for people that don't know, can you define those two paths, the mystical path and the occult path?
Yeah, mystical path is focused on leaving everything behind and achieving the higher states of consciousness. Just to kind of put it simple, there might be different definition, but in a simple words, this is about inner path, which doesn't include so much of a reading or mental activity, except for certain meditations. Yeah. And it also involves it involves a great attraction to the source and sort of disinterest to the material surrounding. So basically, a person on a mystical path wants to leave everything behind, doesn't want to create any more connections in the material world, and just wants to apply all its energy and force to move to the source. This mystical path, it's about intuition, it's about revelation, visions, and all these inner activities. It could be very difficult at times. Yoga would be one of these paths. The yogis in Himalayas, they engage in mystical practices, and they succeed. They achieve their goal. But then starts the occult path, and the occult path is more about acting in a material world with that sort of knowledge and feeling which you developed for the spiritual worlds. You basically bring what you learned on a mystical path, you bring into the material world back again, and you start learning how to manipulate the energy with this, how to basically live in this world by being aware in both. So you don't reject
It's
relationships.
again the
You don't
spiral
reject
thing, right? So
society.
the mystical path, you're trying to achieve this high state of consciousness, and
Yes.
once you achieve that, you come back down, and now you're trying to constructively work in matter or in the material world more.
Yes, because you have a memory of how things are out there, even if it's subconscious memory, you still have this memory, and that helps you to mold this environment to be maybe something like what you experienced on your mystical path. And that's when you become a conscious occultist and you start serving others more on an occult path, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
because that's the important part of the occult path, is that you're doing it out of service. You're doing it in alignment with God's will. It's not, the term occult has been kind of messed up, but we're not talking about black magic. You're not manipulating forces for your own benefit. You're doing it to serve God, to serve humanity, to serve the spiritual group, as it were.
yes, of course, yeah. Yeah, there is we know that there is a right-hand path and there is a left-hand path. It's kind of a little bit difficult to talk about it without bringing the question of polarities into this. But basically, once you achieved that kind of position in higher realms, and in Eastern philosophies, they tell you that actually when you first kind of projected into the material world, you do not have a spiritual body, you're just a spark of light. And first you develop your kind of material vehicles, then you go on the mystical path, and then it's a path about developing your spiritual body, which allows you to go into the higher realms in a conscious state and exist there. Because when you are there, everything feels and looks as real as down here. But it's not material. There are different physical laws which operate there. And then now you develop quite a defined spiritual body that and it stays, it doesn't go away, But then you come back, and because you already have this body, it gives you strength to go on an occult path and become a real creator. Becoming magician is about becoming creator. Yeah, and here we can define the difference between right-hand path and left-hand path, because on the left-hand path you don't create, you destroy. You destroy what God creates on the left-hand path. Yeah. You throw challenges at souls. You serve yourself basically. But on the right-hand path, you are actually a creator. And in order to create, you need to know because you are a co-creator with your source, with absolute. Yeah. So you need to know the original blueprint and how things are in the higher realms, and then you try to create the same. And you start with serving to others because that develops the understanding that we are all one. And it's not possible to exist in higher levels with any kind of separate mentality when you're saying that this is me, this is them, and then you get into kind of competition with this. So serving others, which in extreme case may start feeling like saving everybody, but this is a part of a secondary glamour, because we don't save anybody. We only save ourselves. And as we save ourselves, with that we save everybody. Because we are one. So when you get too much into the savior mode, you actually, basically what you're saying to yourself is that I'm better than them because I am more powerful and I can save them. It's not exactly there is a slight difference between this and serving others.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in what you're saying.
Yeah. It sounds all good, yeah, I want to help people, I want to save them, but saving them is not necessarily helping them. Loving them is helping them. You cannot harm anybody who you love, but I'm talking about real love, not about attachment. Again, this is what relationships are.
Well, real love has some connection to wisdom, right? And that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's not blind. There's genuine understanding there. This one teacher said something like, you can't really love a thing or a person that you don't understand. And your love is sort of proportional to how much you actually understand them.
Yes, understanding.
Even if it's sort of unconscious, you might sort of unconsciously understand them. But that's a larger thing.
Yeah, it's about empathy. Yeah, it does mean understanding does mean you agree with them.
Yeah.
But what gets on the way of real unconditional love is attachment. Because when you attach, somehow it manipulates your consciousness into a certain mental constructs which serve to keep your attachment. And that may not serve the person or it may not serve you. Because the difference between attachment and unconditional love, that happens around the time of the third initiation, when your center of being moves from the heart into the throat. The lessons connected to the heart are being learned, and you move on, and this is where you experience unconditional love. And we also know it in kind of New Age circles as a gate 1111.
Gate 1111?
1111.
Oh, interesting.
You know, everybody says 1111. This is a gate where having experienced unconditional love, you realize what the real love is, and there's no way back.
Why is it called 1111?
Well, it refers, I don't really know why, but it refers to a system which actually breaks human evolution into, I think, up to 36 stages or maybe more. I don't want to get into this because I don't have references to this. I just know it's like incidentally 1111 is about this, and in the last few years it was a very popular thing, you know. People are 1111.
Interesting.
That's because you're entering the Aquarian Age, where this experience become pivotal for many, because you cannot have right human relationships if you don't know what love is. If you mix up love and attachment, if you think that love, attachment is love, then you have what we have now. You're not going to have a right human relationship society.
Yeah.
Because you basically can't love anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't love yourself either. Yeah. Because if you don't love others, and we are all one, you, technically speaking, you don't love yourself.
Yeah. You have to have both of those, right? You have to be able to love yourself and love others. And if one of them is lacking, then it's not really on the right frequency.
So this is why a third initiation is considered the first major one, because this is such a big difference when you experience something like this. This becomes such a lakmus test. First of all, it's very difficult to pass this barrier. If you have certain unresolved trauma, they're not gonna let you through. If you don't have enough vitality, you're not gonna go through it. And sometimes people they're just too afraid to let go of the familiar, you know. You have to have like really be trained spiritually and trust in order to go through this barrier, you know. You have to trust, because it's very counterintuitive situation, you know. But a lot of big part of humanity are gonna have to learn about what is unconditional love in order for Aquarian society to come into being. And then this unconditional love will pour out into the masses, and others will experience it and join in. And this will bring in the whole new construct, new societal construct, which will not be based on competition, but on cooperation. And where people are not going to be treated as rivals and obstacles, but as somebody who you have to serve and help and bring them all on the same level. This is where idea about succeeding as a collective will become much more important than succeeding as an individual, like in the Piscean age.
Yeah. You see that in sports, you know. Some people are really good, like a basketball player. They're making all these shots, but some of them they're not able to work with the team, right?
Mhm.
And that's, I guess, the goal in the Aquarian Age is that you can find your place in the team, and more than you making all these baskets is the team as a whole succeeding.
It will happen naturally because sometimes team can hold you back,
Mm.
like in our reality here, team can hold you back, so you want to go on your own. Yeah,
Well,
but
you have to
then,
find the right team, right?
yeah,
Like
if
you
your
don't want to
team,
be helping a team that you're not supposed to be part of, right? You got to find the team or the group rather that you're meant to be a part of, and then you can naturally do what you have to do there.
yeah, if your team already cleaned their own subconscious, then there are no triggers and there are no obstacles. Then everybody can move together
Hmm.
peacefully into the future like this. So, as DK said, clearing of the highways, I believe this stage is coming to an end by the year 2025. I think it was a big theme between 2012 and 2025,
Did
maybe
you say
20.
clearing highways?
Yeah, yeah. That's in externalization of the hierarchy. He says that he's talking about stage of clearing the highways.
Hmm.
Or if you take another example of the Heracles, it's cleaning the stables.
Hmm.
It's about cleaning the subconscious. And this is a very, very necessary stage. And the more we can do it for ourselves, the better. Because not only we help our own spiritual progress, but we're also helping humanity as a whole to move forward this way by removing our own triggers.
Yeah. You're not adding to the collective weight of
Yeah.
negative psychic stuff if you've cleaned yours out.
Yes, yes, your vibration goes up, you start emanating it, you become more positive, things become more easier to meditate. You can then make spiritual decisions which you wouldn't be able to with all this load. So this is a very important stage. And now, after 2025, even though the cleansing still goes on, there is another activity for spiritual people, and this is about visualization of the future society, how it will be. DK, he also writes about this, that we need to visualize with all the details so clearly that we would ourselves believe that this is real. This is how we're gonna come into the Aquarian Age. Could take time, but yeah, but this is the process that we need to do. But we cannot do it if we have triggers. Because
If
then
you have
again,
what?
triggers. If you have
Triggers.
triggers,
Yeah, triggers.
then we again engage in miscreations. Because we will be acting out of our pain.
Well, I think we've reached a pretty good point in the conversation. We sort of started at the low end and built all the way up to creating the Aquarian Age. Is there anything you wanted to add before I moved on to the final question?
But I wanted to add that there is no right and wrong way about this, because now we have so many people present on Earth from different traditions, different spiritual paths, coming with different experiences. But the best way is just to follow your happiness, follow your heart, and be attentive to where your intuition guides you in terms of your spiritual moves. What do you need next? Yeah, good teachers are always nice to have, and I think we should avoid being sectarian, because everybody thinks that my tradition is better than somebody else's tradition.
Yeah. And that's
But
one of
yes,
the obstacles to the New Age, because in the New Age, these traditions need to some degree come together. There needs to be
yeah,
a synthesis.
they're all part of branches of the same tree, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when somebody says, yeah, this tradition that I follow is better than all the other traditions, he's actually right. But it's better for him, maybe not for somebody else.
Yeah.
Somebody else may still be learning some qualities in a different tradition. And this is all needs to be understood and embraced and brought together as one in a non-violent way,
Yeah.
non-judgment.
We don't want to conquering all these things and bring them together like that. That's the old way of bringing things together.
Yeah, that kind of brings to the question of being a savior, because, if I think this is right, I want everybody to do this. I save them, but this is a mistake. You don't save them. You have to make the information available for them, but they will have to choose themselves.
Yeah. As DK has said a number of times, to leave people free to serve as best they think, or to move along the path as best they think.
Freedom is a necessary condition for the spiritual growth. Yeah, because a lot of it is guided by intuition of the person. And if you arrested this process, then they can't move on. They can't move forward. They're basically stuck with your idea, and they are arrested. The movement is not happening. Yeah, something like that.
All right, so the final question that I asked the people who are aware or into the ageless wisdom or esoteric teachings: what aspect of the plan do you think we should be paying more attention to? What aspect of the plan is sort of DK hints at it, at least, would you like to call people's attention to?
I would say that, well, there is one actually good thing. If you find yourself in an imperfect situation, you ask yourself, what can I do to make it better? You can always make it better. Whenever you find yourself, whatever darkness you find yourself, whatever undesirable circumstances you find yourself, you can always do at least something little bit to make it better. If we all try to make it better, I think our efforts will add up together, and we will all move in the right direction. Yeah. So, but it has to be done in a very non-violent and non-attached way. You have to watch for your attachments, because sometimes what we think better is not necessarily better. But what lifts up the atmosphere, what makes us feel happier in general, like not depending on somebody else, but in ourselves, we should just try to make it better, because we are still going through a very dark, difficult time. We still don't really see what's happening, and we are all coming with different tasks to do in this process. Some of us are visualizing the future, some of us are still dealing with the past, some of us are still dealing with triggers. So whatever you do, wherever you are, just try and make it better.
Sounds good. And everybody can do that, no matter what stage of evolution you're at.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Julia, for coming on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. And till next time, as Joshua's Magic, may the force be with you all.
Thank you.